What's going on with DC? We've heard a lot of news from Warner Media and from, DC's head of management. They had the shakeups, and we've heard a lot of talks about them wanting to go in there and really compete to be the number one comic company. Is that realistic? Why are they trying to do that? And are they being serious, or is it just hype? Let's talk about that. Hey everybody, this is Perch. This is another reader question. I'm going through email, so I apologize. I'm behind, a lot behind, and some people have sent me some samples to review. I need to get to that. I've invested way too much time than I should have in some new templates and formats for my videos, which you'll see rolling out over the next couple weeks. I have a couple things going on in the back end, and then I got on a roll with drawing some pages for my comic. So I just tried to double down and focus in that area. So I apologize for not answering mail. We'll get to that as fast as I can. But thank you very much for sending it. Please do. I'm reading everything. I just am bad about responding to everything or lately anything. But anyway, this is a reader question from Bambos. So thank you. You can send me a few questions, and I appreciate those. I'm going to get to all of them. The question is AT&T serious about DC selling more? Is this gleam of sanity? Have they said that DC Comics should really be popular because they have Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman? Do they want to own the number one comic company in the US? And wouldn't this be a seismic change for any comic company? It wouldn't, but I'll get to that in a minute. To have to sell more to hire writers that prove themselves to be popular rather than writers who've been hired for 20 years and never achieve anything but average sales. To hire artists that grow sales on books. To create books that stand on their own merit rather than just act as fodder for the annual big event. Is DC being shaken out of its comfort zone, or is AT&T just spouting jargon and the old insanity will be just replaced by a new insanity? It's amazing how much having to sell more is a total game changer for everyone. And man, what a true statement that is. It's weird because comics at different times have flirted with this idea of sales don't matter. And I think it's often because the people who say that are usually Marvel and sometimes DC, and they've been in the number one and the number two slot of comic publishers. So, they're in a position where they can say, sales don't really matter because they know they're number one. In DC's case, I think they've been number two. The last time they were number one for any given length of time was a New 52, close to 10 years ago. And they've had brief moments. Rebirth put them on top for a couple months, but generally speaking, DC is a tough one because my general observation about DC as a comic company is that they seem to have not enough patience to let things play out. When they're onto something good, when they do get some momentum and they get people interested in the titles, they seem to want to immediately tinker with it to either like let's grow it faster, or it's not growing fast enough, let's abandon this and try something new. And with each new attempt, it tends to water down their success. I think if you look at kind of how things went toward the tail end of New 52, it was very popular. Then sales started to sag. They went for Convergence and then DCU, both of which were not successful. There's some good things that came out of each initiative, but by and large, they weren't successful. They did the mea culpa with Rebirth shortly thereafter. And then before Rebirth even had like 4 months under its belt, they started announcing kind of game-changing things for the company. You had Metal come in, and that was going to be different. And then you had kind of Heroes in Crisis, and that was good. That torched what they did with Wally. And then it's this constant kind of back and forth. We had Year of the Villain, and then Year of the Villain didn't fully get welcomed by the other creators. And so then you transition rapidly into death metal, but at the same time we're doing death metal, we're going to do Joker War, and we got to get Tom King off Batman. We're going to put Tinian on there, but just for a couple issues. No, wait, maybe we'll have him keep going forever. And hey, let's do this future state stuff. And then we got a new DC after that. And all those things are indicative of a company that's kind of flailing around, not patient enough to just let the story play out. And so it seems like they're trying to accomplish something, but they're not letting it kind of sit in. They're not letting it set. AT&T is definitely serious about DC selling more. They want that brand to be popular. They feel like they've got something very, very strong with Batman and Superman and those brands. Now, notice I'm saying the word brand and not comics, because to AT&T, comics are kind of it's an output. It's just one product. I think they view comics as, hey, stories are being told here. There could be some good IP that comes out of it, new characters, new movie ideas, etc. But really, when they see the dollars, they see these brands being merchandised and licensed and turning into movies and all this kind of stuff. And comics is kind of one of those things. To AT&T, this will make people shudder, but to AT&T, the comic line probably feels a lot like how they feel about licensing Superman's logo for T-shirts. It's kind of in that same vein. It's just one thing we do with this brand. The comic is not the source of that brand. For them, the brand is the source, and the comic is an output. And if you start to think about it that way, it kind of, I don't know, you start to go cross-eyed, and it's not to say a happy thought that you get into. But they definitely want this stuff to be popular. The trick is, I don't think they view make the comics popular as critical to that success. In fact, in the halls of AT&T or Warner Media and everything else, when they talk about how do we make more money out of Batman, you know, think about the PowerPoint presentation that goes to the other executives is going to be 49 pages of, movie ideas and brand licensing and recognition and some marketing. And then one of those last slides will have, and here's all the things that can use that brand. And one little, like, there'll be a little graphic of comics in there, along with t-shirts and coasters and video game licensing and everything else. That's unfortunately just how they view it. So AT&T is serious about DC brand selling more. They're not necessarily serious about DC Comics selling more. They don't terribly care. Now, this is like that sounds like tough love kind of comment. I'm making these very dark kind of comments. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean bad news for comic fans. In fact, to the contrary, a lack of kind of corporate involvement and micromanaging could be a good thing for the comics. It just depends on what the publisher and what the people inside of DC do to actually make the most out of this opportunity where there's a lot of attention for their brand and maybe not a lot of scrutiny for the comics they produce. In the right hands, that could be a great mix. That could be a wonderful combo. Unfortunately, the hands that are managing this stuff tend to be a bunch of people who have been in the industry for a very long time. They're old, names that people know. And in some cases, it's because new names who are wanting to make a lot of money, very ambitious, and everything else. They're not going to go to comics. If you're a new person, has some creative talent, and you're like, I really want to, make a lot of money and do a lot of things. Your odds are you're going to go to games. You're going to go do something else where you can kind of make a lot more money. Now, if you love comics, and there's a lot of people who absolutely love comics. They may still play in it, but increasingly they're probably going to be looking for ways to do stuff outside of DC because they want to control their own destiny. If they're ambitious and smart, they're going to be putting more of their bets out of DC than in DC. So that leaves DC and Marvel in many cases, and unfortunately, and it's more destructive for them, IDW and Boom and Dark Horse and all these guys, it's left with a lot of people who've been in the industry for a long time. And some of these people probably need to retire from this industry. They're out of they've given some good ideas, they've given some great contributions to comics, but they shouldn't be in the leadership position anymore because they've been there, they're stale. They've been there for a long time, and on top of that, they have a certain expectation for how the business should look, for how popular it should be, for how strong it is. And so they kind of, inflict their own self-defeat by making comics smaller. I think right now, comics could be a lot huger, doing a lot more. But the problem is, a lot of the people running it have an expectation of how successful comics are. It's kind of how successful they are at this exact moment, and they're not sitting back in their offices or at home while they're socially distancing and going, "How do we triple this business? What if everything we're doing is wrong and we need to do it all differently? What would that look like?" I'll tell you, if you go to a successful tech startup or any small product company, that's a question they ask themselves all the time. They say, all right, let's assume everything we're doing right now is end of life and we need to do something new. What would that new look like? They're challenging themselves constantly with these ideas. I can tell you for a fact that's not happening in comics, not nearly enough. And so you combine that with a kind of a club mentality of a lot of, buddy hiring and other things. There becomes no huge motivation to change things in a major way, and there needs to be. So AT&T is definitely serious about DC doing more as a brand. Unfortunately, the comics are kind of the tail of that, and a really smart, clever, ambitious person who's running the comics division could create a scenario where the tail wags the dog and comics becomes pretty powerful. But chances are, a lot of people in those positions are either just kind of fighting to kind of keep their jobs, or maybe they've been enamored by some nice stock options for AT&T because they're in an executive position. Not saying this is happening, but let's just say it is. Let's just say this is exactly what's happening. And for them, it's like, well, how do I just survive 5 years here so these options are worth more and I can bank $1 million, $2 million, and call it a day? And I don't think there's a lot of people inside of DC or Marvel, for that matter, or many companies in comics going, how do I make $50 million? I would like $50 million. I'd like $150 million. Those people are kind of few and far between. And frankly, when they show up, they're often insulted by their peers for being just out for money. So it's a broken situation. Anyway, wonderful question. Curious what you think as a listener. What do you think about all this? Do you think AT&T is serious about DC doing more? Do you have big hopes that the comics division does well, or do you kind of agree with me that their attention is more focused on the merchandise and the brand? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. But most importantly, thanks for listening.